Hey there, and welcome to another one of my videos. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about freedom of speech and some things that I think go a bit unnoticed about it. These are things that you might not have heard of or that you might not have thought about yourself. At least I didn't. And freedom of speech is a bit like democracy in the sense that it's so obvious and we all enjoy it and no one would really go against it, that we forget a bit the reasons for it. Why is it actually any good? This first part is going to be a bit more about the generic stuff that you might have already heard before. So if it's a bit boring at the start, you can already skip to the second part. As you might already know, freedom of speech is a basic human right in any democratic society, since it allows for you to express your opinions, your thoughts, without the fear of censorship or even threats. It's pretty obvious why this is something very good, and I feel a bit stupid for having to say this, but I think it's worth saying anyways. Firstly, freedom of speech opens up the opportunity for dialogue and discourse, which in turn can lead to progress in almost anything. Innovations, social progress of any kind. It's very important in order for us to advance as a society. Also, freedom of speech is absolutely vital in order to have a well-informed society. And living in a democracy where everyone gets a chance to vote and express their opinion, I think it's in everyone's best interest to have a well-informed society as well. Secondly, the fact that people can express their opinions and criticize also leads to a greater degree of accountability for those in charge and those that represent the people. Because if you can express your opinion and criticize, there is a much higher chance that the people responsible or people that have more power will be held accountable, because you can criticize and openly express your thoughts about them. This is especially important for marginalized groups and those with the least representation, in order for them to be able to get any of their voice out, because without freedom of speech they would be very limited in doing so. And clearly it can go wrong, or it can go a bit too far, as can anything in this world. Everything always can go wrong in some way or another, and I think it would be a bit naive or even lazy thinking to assume that it cannot go too far. Some people, they argue that it can lead to hate speech or dangerous ideologies, which we don't want either, of course. So there is some kind of balance that is needed as well. Of course, this all sounds very easy to say just like that, and in the real world it will be a lot more difficult to apply, because inevitably you're gonna stumble into some gray areas, especially in like the political sphere. It will always be gray areas, and in those cases, in order to make life easier and in order to reach quick conclusions without having to concern yourself with too much nuance, it's very easy to start disregarding the emotional arguments or personal experiences as arguments, saying they don't constitute arguments at all. This is something that I think sometimes the political right attempts to do, or at least what they like to think that they are doing. They like to think that they represent hard truths and facts, but often instead miss some of the nuance and miss some of the bigger picture. And the left side, on the other hand, sometimes make it sound as if they somehow have monopoly for good morals, or that they are the only ethical ones. And of course also sometimes attempt the good old virtue signaling. Like just saying that you represent human rights or equality doesn't really constitute an argument. All that does is try to imply that the opposition would somehow be against those things, and that you're of course morally superior. And it's a bit weird, like, do you expect some sort of medal or a pat on the back for saying out loud that you have finally reached basic human decency in being a supporter of human rights? Personally, I find both sides rather tiring and also a bit incomplete as an approach. Also, I feel like I have to admit, when I was younger, and if someone brought up hurt feelings or saying that something is offensive just as an argument, there would always be this little urge in me to say, I'm still waiting to hear what your point is. It was like this little itch that I felt I needed to scratch to say this. However, me saying that would not have been very fair, because life is certainly very unfair, and with the risk of sounding pessimistic, of course, I think it's one of the only certainties in life is that life is going to be unfair. And I think we can all relate to how infuriating, like truly infuriating, injustices can be. Just during the school days, when you had, if you ever had like a biased teacher or whatever, these minor injustices that in the grand scheme of things really mean nothing could really make your blood boil. And they're also nothing compared to all the other injustices that are happening daily out in the world. But still, they made our blood boil. So I think we can all actually understand frustration and the validity of feelings, so to say, in real issues where we feel there are injustices. And if you think about it, all the world boils down to is experiences. The only way any of us experience the world is through experiences and perception, which will always be subjective. So the subjective experiences really do matter. And I think it can be worth acknowledging if something is offensive to someone. Just it's also worth keeping in mind that this on its own will not constitute an argument, but rather a subjective experience of how they have perceived the world. And this is in no way an attempt to kind of minimize subjective experiences or personal experiences. I believe almost always the most important things in our life are going to be very subjective and very personal. And I think this is a problem when you see some debates or discussions where someone is bringing up a personal experience or is trying to represent other people's personal experience, and then the other person that they're arguing tries to counter along the lines of, maybe they don't say this directly, but along the lines of that facts don't care about your feelings. Or they try and hide a bit behind some very convenient statistics to disregard what the other person just said. And although the statement that facts don't care about your feelings is obviously correct, this doesn't mean that the other person is wrong either. And also, just because someone mentions a statistic doesn't mean that they are going to be right. Statistics can very easily be misleading to people that don't know how to interpret them, or that don't know about the research methods, or that don't know how they are calculated, for example. In short, I think we can all say that personal experiences exist and they should be acknowledged. And on the other hand, we also need to accept facts as facts, and they need to be considered as truths. But when this happens in like a debate where it's personal or an experience, something subjective versus something considered a fact or a truth, it's as if when they argue each other using these against one another, it's as if one person is playing basketball and the other one football. Like someone might bring up something that is in the realm of feelings, so to say, and it might not be conducive to the discussion, or it might not be considered like really an argument for what they're discussing, but still it needs to be countered with something also within the realm of feelings. You cannot counter a personal experience with a general statistic on the level of the population, because these forms of arguments, so to say, don't have the same origin, they don't have the same implications, and they don't have the same purpose in a discussion. I don't know if I'm making a mess of this now, but I hope you could kind of understand what I'm trying to say by all of this. Now, more importantly, an aspect of freedom of speech that I think is almost always overlooked is about the audience. It is not only the right of the person that speaks to be heard, but it is also the right of the audience to listen and to hear what they have to say. Each time that you silence somebody, in a way you also deprive yourself from the right to hear. And freedom of speech, after all, is completely pointless unless it also means freedom of speech for the people that think differently. And in this way, freedom of speech also forces, or at least gives the opportunity to society and to people to think about why they know what they think that they already know. It gives people and to society the chance to think, how do I know this except for the fact that it's the only thing I've ever been told and never been told anything else. And I think this is a very important aspect of freedom of speech that we often overlook. Like, what would you do if you met a flat earther, for example? Could you even prove that the earth is round? Or do you only know how to regurgitate what everyone else has always told you? Obviously, the earth is round, but could you prove it? Or are you just holding on to this opinion because you're supposed to? Most people that know that the earth is round, and they know that the earth is round, they will still not be able to explain you why or how. Freedom of speech allows us to question also in this way, like, how sure are you actually about your own views? We should not always just hide behind the consensus because we get to be part of the moral majority. Because don't forget, if you would have been for the women's right to vote 200 years ago, you would have gone against your government, you would have gone against probably your local church, and you would probably have gone against your family and your close friends. And yet now, for us, it seems crazy how anyone could ever have thought any differently. And you feel that you are way too good of a person to ever have thought any differently, no matter what time period you would have been born in. It's scary, and it almost hurts just to think about what kind of views you might have supported if you were only born in a different time. I think reminding ourselves of this can give us some form or can give us some humility when thinking about our own current opinions, and maybe it makes us think twice before we're just simply seek refuge in the consensus. Just remind yourself of all the terrible consensus there has been in the past, because for sure there will be some more terrible consensus in the future as well. So being kept on our toes in regards to opinions and views, and constantly getting the opportunity to be questioned by other people, and in that way also question yourself, how sure am I about my own opinions? This assures that society maybe can avoid some terrible consensus in the future, and for this, freedom of speech is absolutely necessary. Don't get me wrong, in most cases the consensus is probably correct, or at least close to it, because chances are that a lot of effort and a lot of thought has been put into the consensus. But the big risk with blindly following a consensus is, firstly, you might end up being part of the consensus that women shouldn't be allowed to vote, like in the past. And secondly, you risk outsourcing your own thinking. Your thinking is something you definitely want to be doing on your own. Like if you meet a person and just by knowing one of their opinions, you already know all the rest of their opinions, this pretty much tells you that they don't have a single original thought of their own. Like, if you can guess every single one of their opinions, then chances are they have just taken these opinions from someone else and they outsource their thinking. I mean, first of all, most issues are pretty complex, and it's almost impossible to really have a thought out opinion about everything that there is. Secondly, I think most issues, or talking about especially complex issues, the more you think about them, the harder it is to be 100% sure about an opinion. Because truly thinking about it should force you to also come up with counter-arguments. And also, I don't know why anyone would want to outsource their own thinking. I think in a way it's even sad. If you outsource your thinking and you just kind of download the opinions of someone else, in a way you're not really living your own life. You're copying or hitching along on someone else's. And you are doing this during the one and only life that you get. This was all I really had to say. I hope that someone could find this a little bit interesting. And if not, and you made it to the end of the video, thank you anyway. And in all honesty, this is not really any revolutionary ideas or any real original thoughts either. Personally, I'm just happy that this video is a lot shorter than the other ones. It will mean less editing for me. And once again, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you for your attention. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.